There are lives that history remembers with stone and gold, and others it preserves only in silence. St. Caran belongs to the second kind. He did not leave behind towering cathedrals or thunderous sermons echoed in chronicles. Instead, his life survives as a quiet ember, glowing beneath the surface of Scotland's early Christian memory, waiting to be felt rather than admired. In the eastern lands of Scotland, during a time when faith traveled without roads and belief spread without protection, Caran answered a call that offered no reward except obedience. This was not an age of comfort. It was an age when to believe meant to endure cold, suspicion, isolation, and the slow work of planting seeds that might never bloom in one's lifetime. Many today feel the same quiet weight. They believe, yet feel unseen. They serve, yet feel forgotten. Their faith does not shout. It waits. St. Caran speaks directly to these souls, not by words recorded, but by a life that proves holiness does not require recognition to be real. He lived at the edge of the known Christian world, where structure was fragile and certainty rare. As a missionary bishop, Caran was not merely administering sacraments. He was embodying the church itself. Wherever he walked, the church walked. Wherever he prayed, Christ was announced without banners or applause. The Aberdeen Breviary remembers him briefly, almost modestly. Yet this restraint is revealing. Saints like Caran were not formed to be remembered, but to be faithful. Their work was not designed to impress history, but to shape souls quietly, patiently, like a husbandman tending soil through unseen seasons. In a world obsessed with visibility, St. Caran challenges the modern believer. What if your mission is not to be known, but to be faithful? What if your calling is not applause, but endurance? His life confronts the fear that a quiet faith is a wasted faith. Caran reminds us that the vineyard of Christ is not only for the celebrated saints whose names fill books, it is also for those who labor unseen, whose prayers are whispered into cold air, whose sacrifices are known only to God. In this, his story becomes deeply personal. Before miracles are spoken of, before symbols are interpreted, St. Caran stands as a mirror. He reflects the silent believer back to themselves and asks a single, unsettling question. If no one remembers your name, will you still walk forward? St. Caran was born into a land that did not yet fully belong to Christ. Eastern Scotland in the 7th century was a place of transition, where older beliefs lingered and the Christian message required patience more than persuasion. From the beginning, his faith was not inherited as safety, but chosen as risk. Little is recorded of his early years, yet this absence speaks volumes. Caran did not rise through privilege or intellectual acclaim. He was formed in obscurity, shaped by discipline, prayer, and a steady acceptance of hardship as part of obedience. His vocation matured not in comfort, but in restraint. As a missionary bishop, his authority was not reinforced by power structures. He traveled lightly, often alone, moving between scattered communities where faith was fragile and trust slow to build. Every step forward demanded resilience, because retreat would have been easier, safer, and unnoticed. The climate itself became a form of penance. Cold winds, long winters, and rugged terrain mirrored the interior discipline demanded of him. St. Caran's mission was not heroic in spectacle, but heroic in consistency. Day after day, he chose to remain. There were no assurances that his labor would bear visible fruit. Converts were few, setbacks common, and misunderstandings frequent. Yet his ministry was rooted in the conviction that faithfulness is measured by perseverance, not outcome. Caran's suffering was not dramatic enough for legend, but it was deep enough to shape a saint. His trials were quiet: hunger, fatigue, rejection, and the ache of continuing without affirmation. These were the stones with which his sanctity was built. In this, his life mirrors the experience of countless believers who carry responsibility without recognition. Parents, caretakers, servants of faith. Those whose sacrifices remain unseen find in St. Caran not a distant hero, but a companion in endurance. By the time of his death in 669, there was no triumphant conclusion, no public recognition. Yet the Church remembered him, quietly, faithfully, because some lives preach more powerfully after they end than while they are lived. Not every miracle announces itself with thunder. Some arrive like dawn, slow, unnoticed, yet irreversible. The miracle associated with St. Caran belongs to this quieter order, one that reshapes hearts rather than landscapes, and alters destinies without demanding witnesses. In the eastern reaches of Scotland, where faith was fragile and doubt deeply rooted, Caran's presence itself became a point of disruption. Villages that once resisted the gospel began to soften, not through force, but through proximity to a man who embodied what he proclaimed. Accounts do not speak of sudden healings or visions of fire. Instead, they speak of hardened hearts yielding, of communities reconciling, of fear loosening its grip. This is the kind of miracle that escapes records, but leaves a permanent mark on human lives. There were moments when Caran stood before people who had never seen a bishop, never trusted a Christian messenger. In those moments, his calm endurance spoke louder than doctrine. What changed them was not persuasion, but presence. The Orthodox hymn calls him a jewel of the northern kingdom. This is not poetic exaggeration. Like a jewel hidden beneath earth, his sanctity refracted light quietly, influencing those who came near without ever drawing attention to itself. One tradition speaks of communities transformed not by command, but by example. Fields once divided by hostility were worked together. Families once isolated were drawn into shared prayer. The miracle was not that stones moved, but that people did. St. Caran's miracle confronts modern expectations. We are taught to look for spectacle, for measurable proof, for moments that can be captured and replayed. His life insists that the deepest interventions of God are often unrecordable. There is courage required to accept such a miracle. It demands faith without evidence, trust without applause. Caran walked this path fully, believing that God's work continues even when no one names it as such. By the time of his passing, the eastern lands of Scotland were changed. Not conquered, not transformed overnight, but softened. Seeds had taken root. The miracle had already happened, though few would ever call it that. St. Caran teaches us that some miracles leave no monument, no inscription, no relic of drama. They leave something far more dangerous: transformed people who continue the work quietly, long after the saint is gone. St. Caran left behind no detailed iconography, no standardized image repeated across centuries. This absence is itself symbolic. He represents the saints whose holiness resists reduction into symbols, because their meaning lies not in what they carried, but in how they endured. Yet tradition gives us fragments: the missionary staff, the gospel book, the northern wind, the vineyard metaphor. Each becomes a lens through which his life continues to speak. None are ornamental. All are functional, just like his faith. The staff symbolizes movement without destination. Caran walked not toward acclaim, but toward need. In a modern world obsessed with arrival, his staff reminds us that some callings are fulfilled only in continual motion. The gospel book he carried was not a symbol of authority, but of responsibility. It bound him to truth, even when that truth brought resistance. For today's believer, it reflects the burden of holding conviction without dominance. The northern wind becomes an invisible companion in his story. It represents opposition that cannot be argued away, only endured. Cold, persistent, shaping, it mirrors the unseen pressures faced by those who live their faith quietly. But perhaps the most powerful symbol tied to St. Caran is the vineyard. The Orthodox hymn does not call him a conqueror, but a husbandman, a worker who trusts time more than force, growth more than spectacle. In today's language, the vineyard speaks to delayed meaning, to work without seeing results, to invest in people who may never thank you, to believe that quiet effort accumulates unseen weight in the world. St. Caran becomes a symbol for those who feel spiritually misplaced, those who serve without platforms, teach without audiences, love without recognition. His life reframes success as fidelity stretched across time. In this way, Caran's symbols do not point backward into history. They point inward, toward the quiet decisions that shape a faithful life long before anyone notices. At the end of St. Caran's story, there is no triumphant closing scene. There is instead an invitation, a quiet one. It calls to those who have walked long paths without applause, who have prayed without certainty, who have served without knowing if their labor mattered. Caran does not offer solutions shaped by control or speed. His answer is slower, gentler, and far more demanding. He reminds us that peace is not found by escaping obscurity, but by accepting it as a place where God still works. For those struggling with direction, St. Caran offers clarity without certainty. Walk forward. Not because the path is clear, but because obedience does not wait for reassurance. Faith matures when it learns to move without guarantees. For those carrying spiritual fatigue, his life offers rest without withdrawal. Remain, not because the burden is light, but because leaving would sever what God is still shaping through you. Endurance, he teaches, is not stubbornness. It is trust stretched over time. And for those who feel unseen, St. Caran offers the most difficult comfort of all. You are seen enough. God's economy does not depend on recognition. What is planted in faith grows even when no one marks the season. The Orthodox hymn calls him a beacon of light, not a blazing fire, but a steady flame. This is the light he offers today, not one that dazzles, but one that guides. Not one that demands attention, but one that remains. In this final prayer, St. Caran's voice merges with the hopes of those who continue his work unknowingly. The vineyard is still vast. The laborers are still few. And yet, the harvest is not measured by sight, but by faithfulness. May those who feel spiritually displaced find courage to remain. May those who labor without recognition find peace in obedience. And may those who doubt the value of their quiet faith discover through St. Caran that God has always worked most deeply in silence. St. Caran of Scotland, missionary of the unseen, husbandman of hidden fields, pray for us that we may walk faithfully, shine quietly, and trust the work that continues beyond our sight.